Conference operator today. At this time, I'd like to welcome everyone to the CA Clarity Global Users Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star and the number 1 on your telephone keypad. To withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you, Ms. Bodard. You may begin your conference.
Thank you very much, Tabitha. Hi, this is Karen Bodewin. Welcome all to the fall CA Clarity Global User Community Webcast. Happy to have everyone joining. We are very lucky today to have friend of the community, Steve Romero. For those that know Steve, you know that you are due a great presentation and some thought-provoking information. For those that have not heard Steve speak, I guarantee you that you will leave this webcast with new ideas, new thoughts, and questions about how you actively manage your IT governance now. Steve, we welcome you to the webcast, and we're looking forward to this presentation. We have a few other items that we have on the agenda as well this week. And we'll run through them pretty quickly, but I do hope that folks can stay through the end because we do have some information that is very important for the sandbox users. We're going to talk about the version 13 fix strategy. Stephanie Dumbrell from CA Technologies has joined us. Welcome, Stephanie, and we thank you for taking the time out to join us. We're going to have our, I guess, our third quarter award for the user incentive program. Richard Shapiro, our vice president, will be taking care of that. We're going to have a sandbox update. This has been a huge success, and I think both on the user community side and as the CA side too, because they're getting some metrics that are pretty important to them. And then finally, we'll have our value poll. We do hope that you enjoy this presentation. We are excited to have Steve and the rest of the team on board. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve to get started. There you go, my friend. You have a few extra minutes for your presentation.
Thank you, Karen. And yeah, I appreciate the few extra minutes. It's great to be with another Clarity user group. I've presented to a number of Clarity user groups in the past. And I'm delighted that you've shown interest in IT governance, a discipline and a subject that's just absolutely near and dear to my heart. Normally, when I deliver this presentation, it's at least 90 minutes long. When I do it in a university setting, it could take up to 2.5 and 3 hours. So depending on the form, it takes a lot of time. So I've really condensed it for today, and hopefully I'll get through it in enough time to allow some questions at the end. You know, I make reference to the longer presentation because I wanted to let you know that your hosts here have a copy of this presentation. They've also have a PDF of my long version if you want to see what the presentation looks like in its entirety. But with that, let's go ahead and get started because we've got a lot of information to get through. So whenever I talk about IT governance or any subject for that matter, one of the first things that I want to do is provide a definition to make sure that we're all on the same page. And you would think that's a relatively straightforward task, but in the case of IT governance, it's anything but. So this slide, the intent of this slide is to show you that there are a number of definitions out there. So I've got one from Gartner and one from Forrester, and I have those there not because I particularly like their definitions, just about everybody recognizes those two leading analyst firms. Almost everyone's writing them a check. They saw it fit to come up with their own definitions, even though if you look at the bottom of the slide here, we have a definition from something called the IT Governance Institute. And the IT Governance Institute is an offshoot of ISOCA, the Information Systems Audit Control Association. We'll be talking a lot about them this morning. And the IT Governance Institute's been around for a long time now, and in my mind, it is the most comprehensive collateral and most academic view you'll ever see of IT governance. But despite the existence of this IT Governance Institute, again, organizations like Gartner, Forrester, and I'm not just picking on them, other analyst firms, pundits, large consulting firms, you will find that they have their own characterization of IT governance. Now, why this slide is important is to give you a heads up. I argue that there is no consensus in the industry as to exactly what IT governance is. With that said, I point everyone to the IT Governance Institute, and I also point them to something else here, and I don't have the extra slides in to talk about them today. But the third definition, specifying decision rights and accountability framework to encourage desirable behavior in using IT, that comes from Peter Weil and Gene Ross. And Peter and Gene lead the MIT Center for Information Systems Research at the Sloan School of Management. Peter and Jean 10 years ago wrote the seminal, if not watershed book on IT governance. By Peter's own admission, much of the information in there is out of date today, but it's still the best business book, the most pragmatic view of IT governance that I've ever seen. Coupled with the IT Governance Institute, you get lots of great information. So heads up, there's lots of definitions out there. Be aware of them, but know that you're going to have to find one that suits your organization. So with that, let's look at what I would consider to be some of the authoritative definitions out there. And we start with ISO. So ISO, IEC, the standards body, the international standards body, who again, everybody recognizes, came out, I think, almost 4 years ago with a standard for IT governance, and it's standard 38500. So again, ISO is known for standards, so there is a standard out there. So I mentioned earlier that there's lots of definitions and there's no one view of IT governance. So despite the fact that ISO has stepped into the fray, I guarantee a lot of people aren't even aware that the standard exists and they don't necessarily subscribe to it. But let's take a look at it. So the ISO definition for IT governance, the system by which the current and future use of IT is directed and controlled. Corporate governance of IT involves evaluating and directing the use of IT to support the organization and monitoring the use to achieve plans, include strategy and policies for using IT within an organization. So rather wordy definition, but there are three major words in there that you need to pull out, and that is evaluate, direct, and control. And we'll make more reference to those, but think about those. Keep those in mind. Governance, according to ISO, is about evaluating the organization, then directing them, and then monitoring them to ensure that they're doing what you've just directed them to do. So the objective of their standard is to provide a framework for, and principles for the directors that are influencing IT, that are directing IT. What's interesting here is the word directors. That can mean anything, and it runs the gamut, and it's still a little thunder from the remainder of the presentation. It can be as high as the board of directors, and you'll see that's what I advocate, but not necessarily that. It's anyone who's directing IT. So it's a little nebulous, if you will. Now, that's the objective, to direct IT. But the other objectives you'll find if you look at the standard, they talk about conformance, looking at regulatory requirements and legal requirements. And then they talk about risk, doing those things that ensure that your CEO doesn't get thrown into prison. Now, I grant it, and I admit and I acknowledge that the best thing that ever happened to IT governance was the corporate fraud of the late 1990s. I mean, that corporate fraud advanced IT governance enormously. But to this day, there are still many organizations, still many factions that really look at the core of IT governance, or any governance for that matter, as being directed at managing risk, mitigating risk, doing something about risk. And you're going to see, as we continue through this presentation, that there's much more to IT governance. But again, if you look at the ISO standard, it starts with a broad view, but then it really starts talking more about this risk. In fact, as you dig deeper, they say, you better do this governance stuff, because otherwise, you could be held accountable for breaches. And look at this list of breaches. Again, very risk-oriented view of governance. And you're going to see as we continue through this presentation that governance has much more to offer than just helping an organization manage its risk, and especially when we're talking about IT governance in the field of information technology. So as much as the ISO standards kind of starts kind of broadly and talks about directing IT, it really emphasizes a lot of that risk in conformance and compliance aspect. But then you look at their principles and they kind of zoom out again. They get broad again. Now, I'll go over these very briefly. The first one, responsibility, is one of the ones that's the most interesting. The next five that I'll talk about, you're going to see that there's commonality with other principles that have been published in the past. But that first one's interesting in that they're talking about individuals and groups basically doing what they should be doing. That there's a principle that describes, that expects that people are going to do what they should do. Keep that in mind as we look at the rest of their standard. The other five, again, you're going to see that they have great similarities to some principles I'm going to show you later from the IT Governance Institute. The first one has to do with strategy, and that's basically what the organization's about. Making decisions about technology that are the right fit, that coincide with the direction of the enterprise. Acquisition, that's a very, fancy way of talking about spending money. That the money that we're spending on technology, that it's spent appropriately and that it's spent wisely. Performance, make sure that IT is actually doing what it should be doing, that it's performing in the way that it should be performing. Conformance. It's interesting that they use the word conformance as opposed to risk. because I look at conformance and compliance as a subset of risk. And so this really looks to me to be a risk-based principle. And again, what many people equate IT governance to be associated with risk. And the last one has to do with human behavior, affecting people and making the best use of resources in the organization. So what they're saying is we want to install governance, and the reason we're doing it, the things we want to achieve is that IT performs well, that IT conforms with requirements, that it manages resources well, that it enables the strategy of the organization, that it spends money wisely, and in that that first principle, that people do what they're expected to do and what they should be doing. So here's the model that ISO uses that reflects that description, and again, it gets to those three verbs. So it talks about, okay, governance is about evaluating. So what does this organization need? What kind of organization is this? What state is it in? What market is it in? What's the culture like? What is the strategy? What are the objectives? What are we trying to achieve? Okay, once we understand that, once we evaluate the enterprise and what it needs, now let's direct information technology such that it fulfills that. And now once we provide that direction, once we make those decisions, now we'll monitor management to ensure they're actually realizing what we've just directed them to do. So governance is about evaluating what needs to be done, directing and determining and then directing what needs to be done, and then monitoring to ensure that it's done. So ISO goes on to say that governance is distinct from management, and to avoid confusion, the two concepts are clearly defined in the standard. And they go through pains to show that governance is distinct from management, and we'll talk a lot more about that. So that's the first authoritative source that you'll find out there on IT governance, ISO 38500. The next one is in COBIT. It's found in COBIT, and specifically COBIT 5. For those of you that aren't familiar with COBIT, it's a framework that was established by ISOCA, the Information Systems Audit Control Association, years ago, and COBIT 5 is brand new. Now, I mentioned earlier the IT Governance Institute, and I showed you that definition that came from them and the fact that not everybody necessarily subscribes to it and actually come up with their own copyrighted views of what IT governance is. Well, if you look at the IT Governance Institute's website, which you can find as a sister site to the ISOCA site, you'll see lots of collateral. Well, they actually have this other website that's attached to their overall IT governance website. It's called Taking Governance Forward. And the website's been around for almost 3 years. And you can actually find another definition there. And again, it's rather wordy, but it talks about, stakeholders ensuring that IT is doing what they're supposed to be doing. And it talks about value and risk, et cetera. Great definition, and I'm letting you know that it's out there. But what's interesting is now this definition is superseded by what we'll find in COBIT 5. And ISOCA, some folks from ISOCA actually told me that, because I mentioned, if you go to ISOCA and IT Governance Institute, I can find 3 and 4 and 5 different definitions, and they say, well, now we're deferring to COBIT 5, so that's what we're going to focus on. And so when I make reference to IT Governance Institute and ISOCA, it's in reference to COBIT 5, which just came out in April. So for those of you that aren't familiar with COBIT, COBIT 5 is about IT governance. It's an IT governance framework. Not only that, COBIT 5 has looked at other frameworks out there, like TOGAF and ITIL and CMMI, and they've actually mapped all of those frameworks to COBIT. And what ISOCA will tell you, what ISOCA contends, what their goal is that this is the end-all governance framework of governance frameworks, and it's a single overarching one that everyone can use, independent of whatever their technology might be. So let's look a little bit more about COBIT. Again, for those of you that aren't familiar, it came out in the late 1990s, and it was an audit framework. Auditors were going into IT. They didn't know how to audit IT, and COBIT was established as an audit framework, asked these questions, do they have these controls in place, et cetera. COBIT 2 came out. In addition to being audit, it had some control mechanisms. They started identifying specifically the controls that IT should have in place. And the idea was that IT would start putting those controls in place. I can tell you from experience, I've been in IT for more than 30 years. At that point, we were not using COBIT at all, and it was still being used by auditors to basically poke IT and say, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. In 2000, they came out with COBIT 3. And now, in addition to the control, they started talking about management objectives within IT. And again, at this point, there were a few of us that were adopting certain subsets of COBIT, but for all intents and purposes, you could only find it embraced and really utilized by the IT audit organization. Now, in 2005, they elevated themselves to IT governance, or at least in their mind, in their view, it was IT governance. And frankly, a lot of us, and I'll say, I took a great exception to them characterizing it as IT governance because I think it was missing a number of things. And they actually came out with things later in the risk IT framework, the Val IT framework. You see them in those two ovals there. They came out with those later, and those actually addressed some of those gaps that a lot of us recognized when they came out with COBIT 4 and called it a governance framework. And so many of us took exception to that. Well, what they've done with COBIT 5 is they've incorporated all of that now, and they've renamed it Governance of Enterprise IT. So I want to point something out here. Yes, COBIT 4, I think, was deficient in characterizing itself as IT governance. They attempted to, but it wasn't thorough enough. But that name change gets to a very interesting conversation. The worst thing about IT governance is those first two letters. What I experience again and again and again, and I've been evangelizing this formally for 6 years. I've been involved in IT governance before I knew that it was IT governance. And I can tell you right now, I've visited nearly 200 companies around the world. IT governance is almost always driven by IT. But it's probably IT audit pushing them to do it or poking them to do it. But it's almost always driven by IT. And that's a misnomer. Far too many folks think that IT governance is a function of the CIO, that it's a function of IT, when in fact it's a business process. And I've written a book, and I'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. But I actually argue in my book that the worst thing is those first two letters, and it should have been called Business Governance of IT. Well, COBIT and ISOCA is making a valiant attempt here to do just that. Now they're calling it Governance of Enterprise IT. And so they're trying to show that it's not specifically and only an IT function, that it's the purpose of IT, but it's actually the purpose of the business. That's great. But I don't want people to look at this evolution of COBIT and think of it as an evolution of IT governance. What COBIT has done what ISOCA has done with COBIT 5 is basically do what they should have done when they deigned to call COBIT an IT governance framework when they came out with COBIT 4. You could easily take that IT governance label and put it in that green band and show that now, given what they've done, and they've done some great things in COBIT 5, they've filled in the blanks, they've added a lot of collateral that truly turns it into a governance framework. But again, it's representative more of the evolution of COBIT as an evolution of governance. I argue that ISOCA is catching up with what governance should be. And I say that with, I got to cut them some slack here, because to say they're catching up, they're helping others understand when IT governance around the world is incredibly immature, and most people are far from catching up. But at least now in COBIT, you can find something that I think is fairly representative of a governance framework. So, what is in COBIT 5? It is governance and management of all information, end to end. And it looks at everything, IT function and non-business functions, which is wonderful. A governance framework that actually talks about the business's role in governance, which is critical, which is essential. In COBIT, as in COBIT, every other previous version of COBIT, you're going to find a lot of collateral, and they've gone through pains. And I would say 75–80% of it they brought up from previous versions of COBIT, but boy, it's comprehensive. Processes, organizational structures, principles and policies. It describes now culture, skills, what they call enablers. It really shows all the things that are required to do COBIT. I mean, it is comprehensive. It's a nice piece of work. The problem with that is good luck getting, someone to read it in its entirety, and I'm one of the few, demented people that's done it, but then getting them to actually deploy it, actually undertake a COBIT implementation. And as with most frameworks and methodologies, my chief complaint is they come across as being one-size-fits-all. It's kind of an all-or-nothing proposition, as opposed to, I'm looking forward to the day where they publish these incredible, thought-provoking, comprehensive, and thorough frameworks, but then say, but for your organization, here's how you scale it, or here's how you implement it incrementally, or here's some of the variables that you take into consideration, and maybe not do it in its entirety, but do it like this. I mean, and I'm not telling them to give us, an option A, an option B, an option C, an option D, but at least list the variables that we would want to consider in overcoming the massive barrier to implementing it in its entirety. Eating this elephant is incredibly difficult, and I think it's one of the reasons why many organizations don't do a good comprehensive IT governance implementation, because it's huge. So let's look at their definition of governance. Ensuring that enterprise objectives are achieved, evaluating stakeholder needs, conditions, and options. And that basic stakeholder, you could replace that with anyone that's a stakeholder within an enterprise. Then setting direction through the prioritization and decision-making, and that gets to the heart of a governance. It's about decision-making. We'll talk more about that. And then monitoring performance, compliance, and progress against those agreed-upon direction and objectives. Note the verbs. Those things sound familiar. All three of those bullets. Evaluate, direct, and monitor. The same verbs that you found in ISO 38500. When ISO 38500 came out, you could see vestiges of information that you would have found on the ISOCA site and the ITGI site, and here is the same. They've circled back, and COBIT has reinforced and adopted a lot of the ISO concepts. So ISO and COBIT are very closely aligned. COBIT's far more comprehensive. You look at the ISO standard, it's very brief. The COBIT information, it's voluminous. So that's your definition of governance. Now they've got management in there, because COBIT makes the same distinction between governance and management that ISO does. And they're saying, okay, governance does this evaluation, sets the direction, directs, makes decisions, and then monitors. And who are they monitoring? Management. And management is the one that's planning, building, running, et cetera, executing everything within the organization. COBIT goes through pains to draw this distinction between governance and management. They actually came out with a diagram that shows the distinction. Now, this looks sequential. It's not sequential. I mean, if I took them to task and say, wait a second, things don't happen in this step 1, step 2, step 3, step 5, step 6 fashion, they'll say yes. If we truly drew all of the relationships, the inputs and outputs, et cetera, you would see arrows going back and forth. But this captures the main activities, if you will, the main actions of governance, and that it evaluates, directs, and monitors, and management, that it plans, builds, runs, and then monitors as well. So again, they're showing that there is a clear distinction between them. Now, some people would actually say, okay, hey, this makes sense, and it's a good thing. And one of the problems that many organizations, mostly management, has with governance is that it's so intrusive and overbearing, and that it micromanages. And so COBIT and ISO have taken pains not to offend management, to say, you know what, governance, you're doing the work, but here's how governance relates to you. So you would think, okay, good, that's fair. It's acknowledging these concerns that management has. I actually am going to suggest that this is a problematic concept. So, in ISO and COBIT's view, governance is distinct from management. Okay, well, if it's distinct from management, if you're directing someone, how can you be distinct and separate from somebody or something that you're directing? And is simply monitoring the activities once you've directed them sufficient? And what exactly is monitoring and ensuring? They use those verbs, but they don't tell you exactly what it is or how it's done. And the other thing you'll find missing is, okay, well, what's the repercussion when that monitoring results in identification of a gap or a deviation or a failure? Or maybe they're outright ignoring you. You've set some direction, you've made some decision, and management just blows you off. There's nothing that you'll find in COBIT and standard that talks about this. And that gets back to that principle that I mentioned in that ISO standard, that first one, responsibility. And it was interesting when I first saw that, I was going, what is that? You know, I look at the other 5, and they're very closely aligned with other principles for IT governance that I've seen in the past. But this responsibility one, well, I think that they've put that in there to do something about this relationship. And that is, we expect management to do the right thing. We expect our workers to do what they should do. And boy, that is a huge leap. And I think it can be problematic, especially when the relationship between many governance entities and management entities are less than cooperative. In fact, in many cases, they're incredibly contentious. So I argue that the purview, and I'm right now, this is Steve Romero talking, and I drive the ISOCA and ISO folks nuts when we get into these conversations, and they become heated. So I want to let you know that I'm not speaking for a lot of folks in the industry. But I argue that the purview of governance is not distinct from management because it goes beyond simply evaluating, directing, and monitoring. You know, if governance is distinct from management, I think one of the first problems is it's viewed as an add-on. Okay, we're working, we have our organization, and all of a sudden, you know what, we need some governance. Let's add some governance. Okay, add governance. You know, we've got our world that we're living in right now. We've got our constructs and our organization that we're used to, that we're acclimated to, and now you want to add something. That means you're going to slow me down. That means you're going to make it complex. That means you're going to make it harder for me to do my work. I don't like the fact that something's being added. I'm going to look at it as a roadblock in many cases. I think that's the first problem. The other thing is you're not adding something. Governance is omnipresent right now. For anyone that says, you know what, we don't really have any governance, we're thinking about putting some governance in, Steve. What do you think, do you think we should do that? The first thing I want to do, and I didn't recognize this early when I was evangelizing governance, is after about 2 years, where I had this epiphany that, okay, what you have is you don't lack governance. What you lack are the official, formal, physical manifestations of governance constructs. But what is governance? Governance is looking at something, figuring out what needs to be done, making a decision about what's being done, and then seeing whether your decision is correct. Well, in the absence of somebody else, somebody's doing that. In every organization where there's IT, someone's making decisions about technology. And what's governing those decisions? Well, in the absence of a committee that's making a decision and saying, thou shalt do this, or in the absence of a policy that says, okay, do this or that, or a standard that describes the very specific things we're supposed to do, or a process that shows the activities and tasks. In the absence of that, we're using what's in our heads. We're being governed by our experience, by our beliefs, by our understanding of the organization, by our own desires. Everything a human does is being governed. It's being governed by something. And again, when we start an organization and we get a bunch of people together, what's governing them? Their brains, their relationships, the collaboration. The manager is governing the worker. The director is governing the manager. The VP is governing the director. So governance exists in every one of your organizations right now. The only question is, how's it working? Are you achieving the outcomes that you want? Or maybe we started small and we could do that by working together. We had a great working relationships. We're all in the same room, but now our company has grown and we're big and we're huge. In fact, we're multiple business units. We're disparate in our objectives to meet enterprise goals. We're spread across the globe. We're thousands of people now. Good luck getting those people together to govern with what's in their heads. It becomes more problematic. Now, all of a sudden, it becomes more difficult to make the right decisions. It becomes more difficult to determine what needs to be done. So what do we do? Well, let's help them. Let's help those humans. Now let's give them some of the things that help them make the right decisions. Now we'll start formally establishing governance mechanisms that we're not simply going to be governed by our brains. Now we're going to be governed by committees, by policies, by standards, by processes. And those are not intended to be a roadblock. Those are not intended to be an add-on. Those are intended to make those decisions the best that they can be. Those things are intended to make work possible and practical. It's not an add-on. It's a feature. It's something that increases our capability. So everything that we're doing in governance, I argue, must be integrated with management. So the distinction between governance and management, I think, is often misunderstood, and I think we need to integrate those to be really effective. And yes, I agree, IT governance is not responsible for rendering IT, but it's responsible for the oversight of the processes that render IT. So if we're sitting on that committee, I'm a governor, I just got elected to this committee, and I'm supposed to be making these decisions. It's not enough that I make these decisions. I got to look across at management and say, does management have the capability and the capacity to actually act on this decision? Do they have everything they need such that they can effectively execute on this decision? So that's why I really love this definition that comes from Basil Wood. And it's just about governance. It's not specific to IT governance, but it's just about governance. But it has a word in there that I think is critical to understanding the relationship between governance and management. And what Basil says, he's another IT governance pioneer that I've met through Twitter about 4 years ago. Governance is a system by which organizations are directed and controlled. So, yes, directing and control, we've got those in there. It's about leadership. Oh, I love seeing that word. It involves overseeing the preparations of plans, overseeing the delivery of business change, overseeing the realization of overseeing. It's not simply about being on one side of the fence, on one side of that governance drawing, evaluating, directing, making a decision, and chucking it over the fence to management, and then looking after the fact to see whether or not management did what we wanted them to do. It goes beyond that. And let's look at product and portfolio management. I know I'm talking to Clarity folks. The governance process that you're most familiar with is product and portfolio management, investment decision making. So what does PPM do? PPM evaluates what needs to be done. What do we need to do to meet our strategy to get where we want to go? What programs and projects do we need? Okay, great. Let's direct. Let's decide. Here's the program. We approve this. We approve that. We approve the other. Now let's set them into motion. And for most organizations, that's where PPM stops. And all they want to know after they've set those projects and programs in motion is, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? No. PPM, good project governance, project and portfolio management governance, good investment governance, goes beyond just saying, here's what we should do. It actually looks at the formulation of plans and says, are those plans the right plans? Are those portfolios the right portfolios? And then it monitors the execution of it. It doesn't wait till you're done. It says, show me the progress. Is everything happening the way that it should be happening? Is everything going the way we expected it to go? And then finally, PPM says, okay, now we did all this stuff. Did it deliver the value that we wanted it to deliver? It incorporates all the things that you'll find here, but you'll find in many governance processes, and I just use PPM as one example, and I'm not picking on PPM. It stops with just making the decision and doesn't go forward and really involve itself in the management and governance to be successful. That's absolutely essential. So a lot of stuff on governance and looking at ISO and looking at COBIT, looking at Baselwood's definition, et cetera. Let's make it really simple, though. Governance. You want to make it really simple? At its core, it's the processes and the relationships, the people. And I already talked about, even if we don't have processes, we have people. Process and relationships that lead to reasoned decision-making and the use of IT. And we'll always start with people making the decision. Get an organization together, hire the right people, get them to hire the right people, tell them what to do, and let them get together and do it. But when we find that that approach doesn't fulfill our objectives, then we'll say, okay, well, what decisions are they making, and which of those need to be governed by more formal mechanisms? Who's going to be assigned accountability for actually governing those decisions? And now, how will those decisions be governed? Do we need a committee? Do we need policies? Do we need standards? Do we need processes? That's what governance is really about at its core. So now, okay, that's what governance is. It's about evaluating, directing, controlling, and then we're going to make sure that governance doesn't divorce itself with management, but works very much integrated and in conjunction and partnership with management. Okay, super. Well, what do we want the outcomes to be? Now, I already showed you the principles from ISO, and I actually like the principles, but I wish they would have just taken what IT Governance Institute came out with 10 years ago. So yes, the one principle here about responsibility that says everyone will do what they're supposed to be doing, but it has the other 5. Ensure IT is aligned with the business. That means when I make a decision about technology, it's going to be the right decision for the enterprise that technology is, the right fit. I'm going to make a decision about technology, and I'm spending that money wisely. I'm going to be delivering good value. I'm going to make a decision about technology, and it's going to appropriately manage risk. I'm going to make a decision about technology, and it's going to make the best use of my resources. I'm going to make a decision about technology, and it's going to ensure that I optimally perform at my optimal levels within IT. This is, I think, one of the best things that IT governance in its formal manifestation offers an organization. It gives purpose and meaning to every single decision that we're making in regards to information technology. In fact, I would argue this. If there is anybody in the organization that has anything to do with information technology, and they are not meeting one or more of these principles, then stop doing it. It's a waste of time. I mean, I think about every job that I've ever had in 30 years of working in IT, and I've worked in almost every area of IT or another. I could look back at these and say, you know what, when I was doing this, I was helping to manage resources and manage performance. When I was doing that, I was helping to manage risk and deliver value and ensure IT was aligned. But the problem was I did not have that purpose in mind. That context wasn't there. I was doing it because someone told me to do it. I wasn't necessarily doing it because I had these objectives. And going back to that conversation, that suggestion that I had that governance doesn't necessarily need to be the formal manifestation of committees and policies and processes. It could be just what's in our head. Let's say you don't have any committees, governing bodies, any policy. Everything's being done by seat of the pants. Everything's being done just by getting the right people together, hiring the right people, having them hire the right people, constructing your organization in such a way that they're all working with one another and then letting them do the voodoo that they do. If you did nothing more than this, posted this poster on the wall so that everyone can see and say, okay, everybody out there that's doing something with information technology, when you're faced with a decision, do I do option A or option B? Look at this list and ask yourself, which one will be most aligned with the business? Which one delivers the greatest value? Which one appropriately manages risk? Which one makes the best use of my resources? And which one will help IT perform at its optimal level? This could govern your decisions. So I make that example. It's extreme, but it shows that governance doesn't have to be, and I'm an IT governance evangelist. I'm a certified process master. I love that stuff. I love policy, standards, and processes, but it doesn't have to be all that stuff. And we're going to think about that when we put that stuff in, because we're going to put it in grudgingly. The best governance is the governance that's in your brain. Nothing's faster, nothing's easier, nothing is simpler. The best computers are still between our ears. But when that model doesn't work, we'll say, okay, we need more of a manual approach to this. We need more control. So we have to do this. We have to write this policy. We have to write this standard. We have to come out with this process. And it's because we want to ensure the outcomes that we need. So every one of those things should be making it easier for people to do their work, should be making it easier for people to make the right decisions, should be making it easier for us to meet enterprise objectives. So these are the goals. These are the principles. This is why we're putting in any governance, because we want to achieve these outcomes. So that's what we want to achieve. We're putting in governance to make the right decisions so we achieve those outcomes, make decisions that align themselves with the business, deliver value, manage risk, performance, and resources. Okay, well, what decisions then do we need to govern? Now, that's an overwhelming prospect when you think about the dozens, hundreds. We make thousands of decisions about information technology if we've got a large organization. Which ones are we going to govern? Well, I'm going back now to Peter Weil and Gene Ross's book on IT governance that I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the presentation, and I like what Peter and Gene did. Peter and Gene said, you know what, yeah, there's dozens and hundreds of thousands of decisions, but they really fall into one of 5 decision areas. Now, we don't have time to go through that very top band, IT principles for digitization. It's a mouthful. It's principles for IT, basically describing what kind of IT organization we want. What's our IT archetype? And IT archetype is a specific way of showing there are different characterizations, different manifestations of IT. And again, we don't have time to go through that. And most organizations, frankly, don't have that discussion where they make a decision. IT kind of just evolves into what it is. But look at the other 4 decision areas. Those are decisions every one of your organizations has always made. Even if you don't have a formal enterprise architecture, you have one by default, what I call architecture by accident. But there's an architecture there. There are infrastructure decisions that are being made, infrastructure strategies that are being established. There are business application decisions that are being made, applications and systems that are being deployed to fulfill business needs. And ultimately, someone's making decisions about the money that we're spending. Those are the decisions that we need to govern. Now, that's not to say, okay, we're going to have 4 committees. Depending on the size and scope and nature of the organization, there could be 20, a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen committees that help foster. So there's lots of ways to slice and dice this, but it really gets down to almost everybody, everybody working in IT, everybody that has anything to do with information technology, is basically making a decision that falls into one of these areas. And look at the one on the far right. Again, I'm assuming I'm talking to mostly PPM practitioners. Of the 5 major decision areas that are the focus of governance, product and portfolio management is one of 5. It has an enormous role in governance, a predominant role in governance. It's huge. PPM is absolutely monumental in achieving good IT governance. So we've decided, okay, yes, we do need some governance. Let's start putting in. We understand what we're trying to achieve. Yeah, we want to make sure that we're aligning IT with the business, delivering value, managing risk, performance, and resources. We're going to do that by making the right decisions about the kind of IT organization we're going to have, what our architecture is going to look like, our infrastructure, our applications, and our systems, and then the money that we're spending. So this is just an example. I'm not saying establish every one of these forums. These are names of bodies that I've seen that are characterized as governance. So they can manifest itself any number of ways. And you'll see IT Product and Portfolio Management Committee is one of those committees. But think back. Remember I talked earlier about the integration of governance and management, and we went through these bullets, and it says, often misunderstood. We need to really integrate them. IT governance is not responsible for rendering IT, but it's responsible for the oversight of the management processes. So these bodies, these groups of people that get together, they're not doing the work, but they're making decisions that then inflict work on management, send it over to that management side of that model that we saw in ISO and COBIT. Well, what processes exist there? And here's where I mentioned COBIT was comprehensive. Here are the processes that COBIT says you need to put in place so that governance can be done well. Now, at the top band, in the light band, those 5 processes across the top, those are the governance processes. All of the ones in the darker blue boxes, those are the management processes. Comprehensive, wonderful. And again, I've read COBIT end to end, and I love this stuff. But, again, it's because I'm a psycho IT governance evangelist. Good luck walking into any IT organization and saying, this is what we need to do. Now, I'd like to see it, but tempered and pragmatic and done in a practical and reasonable fashion. But this can be very overwhelming. This is the list of processes that I share with organizations. I mean, I could show them this, but boy, man, that's going to freak some people out. But if you look at this list here, I say these are the governance processes that we need to put in place. Now, we don't need to have these 11 discrete processes. In some organizations, they might condense this into 6. They might have it at 60. Slice it and dice it again any way you want. But I use this list to get the notion across that we need to have these capabilities in place so that when those committees are making those decisions, we have the mechanisms within our IT capability to actually realize those decisions. Now, there's a couple in the middle that are not as pervasive: emerging technology evaluation and adoption. We all do it, but it's not always above board. It's not something that's easily recognizable all the time. And then client relationship management. Not every organization has client relationship managers or business relationship managers that act as a liaison between IT and the business. But the rest of those, look at that list. I think that those are fairly intuitive. You'll recognize, yeah, we do that stuff, especially that third bullet, PPM. I can find those things in an organization. They're not 11 discrete processes, but I guarantee I can go into every one of your organizations and say, okay, provisioning of IT services. I won't find a singular process, but with some analysis, some investigation, I will find a collection of policies, of standards, of processes, of people and functions that are actually enabling the provisioning of the services that IT provides. So the concept behind this is that I need to pull these levers, that I need these capabilities. That governance goes beyond just chucking it over to management. That governance says, you know what, we're going to be champions for this stuff. We're making these decisions and we're inflicting them on management. We're inflicting them on our staff. Let's make sure that they have the capabilities in place such that they can act on our decisions. So they become proponents of these, as Peter and Jean say in their book, of these governance mechanisms. There are 2 dimensions to governance mechanisms: the committees, the roles that are accountable for decision making, that make the decisions, and then the processes that enable that decision making and then enable that decision to be realized. So it's an important thing to think about. So let's step back. Governance. I've talked about these things, and although you might look at this and say, yeah, my organization doesn't have this, I'm not saying that nobody has governance. There's tons of governance out there. There's absolutely an increased IT governance awareness. It's just a question of how is it manifesting itself in one organization versus the other. And more times than not, I find that when there is governance, it's because audit put a gun to somebody's head. They threatened somebody. Or there's risk and compliance requirements. There's regulatory or legal requirements that need to be met. So they characterize that as governance. The term you'll hear is GRC. In some cases, it's because they've mistakenly equated IT governance with PPM. And you saw by my list of processes that PPM is one of 11 governance processes that I have here. All things being equal, bang for the buck. It's my favorite. It's the most powerful. I think the most influential. But there's more to governance than just PPM. But I'll tell you this, every committee that I've ever seen called an IT governance committee, they're responsible for making IT investment decisions solely. And again, there's much more to governance than that. So there's different reasons why organizations are doing governance. But what's interesting is they're not doing it for the one reason that they should be doing it, and that's because the board is governing them. I mentioned it earlier. IT governance is a function of the business. More specifically, those directors that ISO was talking about, IT governance is a function of the board of directors. The board of directors should be ensuring, you know what, that IT budget over the last decade, has it grown, man? It used to be a small percentage of our revenue. It's a larger percentage every single year. And everybody will admit that IT takes up a more predominant role in businesses today than ever before. And yes, the budgets have gone up year after year after year after year, and it takes a bigger chunk of the pie. It's still an ad hoc item for most boards. It's still something that they barely recognize, you know. They delegated decision-making to the CIO and to us IT folks years ago. That delegation, I contend, devolved into abdication, and it's very rare that I find a board that says, we are responsible for ensuring that the money we're spending on technology is the right it's the right fit for the business. It's delivering value, managing risk, performance, and resources. Let's make sure that IT is doing what it should be doing. That when they're making information technology decisions, it's the right decisions, and not just IT, but the business that's provoking IT, the business that's chartering IT, that's requesting IT. Let's make sure they're doing what they should be doing. Again, very rarely done. In fact, it's rare that I can even find CEOs and CFOs and leadership teams, business leaders that are governing IT, that are making sure that the information technology decisions that we're making are aligned with the business delivering value, managing risk, performance, and resources. So the vast majority of people that I talk to when I'm talking about IT governance is the CIO, and we've got to do that kind of bottom-up, grassroots, if you will, attempt at establishing governance in an organization. And here's the reason why a CIO needs to do it. The CIO shouldn't wait for the board to say, we're going to govern you. The CIO shouldn't wait for the CEO and the CFO to say, we're going to govern you. I think it behooves every IT organization to say, we are going to, establish the messages and the principles and the behaviors of IT governance, and then hopefully drag the business kicking and screaming into the fray and show them that they have a role in this decision-making. Not only that, it's their responsibility and they're accountable for ensuring that the decisions that we're making are the right decisions. So how can we do that? How can we start establishing that mindset, that culture? Well, this drawing, I use this drawing to describe that. And you can see it's very simple. Behind everything we're doing, anybody that is doing anything in regards to information technology, I want them thinking about those principles. I want them asking, is this aligned with the business? Is this delivering value, management, risk, resource, and performance? In fact, that's what we're trying to achieve. We're going to make a decision. We're going to make decisions that achieve each of those things. And which decisions? Decisions about the kind of IT organization we're going to have, our architecture, our infrastructure, the systems and applications we provide, the business needs that we fulfill, and the money we spend. Those PPM decisions we make. We're going to take those decisions and feed them into IT governance processes. And I have that box as white because for most organizations, they don't have that. They don't exist. They can't recognize those. But what I can find in every organization are the specific processes, policies, and standards, formal or ad hoc, because you can say, well, we don't have any. Yeah, you do. They're just not written down. They're just not formal. Here's Mary's way of doing it. Here's Bob's way of doing it. Here's the Monday way of doing it. Here's the Thursday way of doing it. But there are processes de facto in place. And why are the collection of those things important? Because that's what's directing your people to do what they do. And that's important. And you'll see this is the only IT governance drawing you'll ever see with the word task on it, and I mean that. The most discrete, minute task in the organization is important to me as a decision maker. Why? Because when I make a decision, I throw it over the fence to management. How do I know whether or not, A, that decision was ever acted on, ever realized, and B, delivered the outcome that I wanted to deliver when I made it in the first place? And that is by looking at the results of the work that my people are doing. This drawing, again, is very simple. You would think, okay, there's only 5 boxes here. We can find this. What you'll find in every organization are the decisions and the activities and tasks. The principles that are driving the decisions and influencing the activities and tasks, maybe not so. IT governance processes, I'm almost never finding those. And then policy, standards, and processes, those are hit and miss. In the absence of this model, in the absence of that circle, in the absence of those connectors, though, what happens is, if we don't have that IT governance process perspective and understanding and awareness and definition, and the policy, standards, and processes, what we're going to do is we're going to make decisions. And when those decisions don't turn out the way we want them to, what do we have to look at? The people that are doing the activities and tasks. which is why when things don't turn out the way we want them to, we fire people or hire people, or we reorg, as opposed to if I'm making a decision and that decision doesn't turn out the way that I wanted it to, I'm going to go through this circle, and I'm going to say, okay, did we make are we being driven by the right principles? Did we make those right decisions? We're going to look at our decision-making process, our governance. Then we're going to look at our governance processes. Are they functioning the way that they should? Do we have the right policies, processes, and standards in place? The last thing I'm going to look at is whether or not the people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. But again, in the absence of this context, in the absence of these connectors, of these entities, we almost always go right to the people when things don't go the way that we want them to. And I argue it's not always. In fact, I'd say it's rarely because the people aren't doing what they should be doing. So we're going to wrap up here. I've mentioned the P word over and over again. I deliver a process presentation. I mentioned earlier I'm a certified process master. I have a process presentation that I'd love to deliver to folks because most organizations take it for granted. I've mentioned process how many times in this presentation, but the art and science of process is lost on most organizations, and they don't invest in that expertise. And if you aren't good at process and process management, good luck doing a lot of the things that I just described. Metrics. If we're putting in governance, any governance, and it's for the purpose of making sure that IT is aligned, delivering value, manage risk, performance, and resources, prove it. You just made me spend how much on Clarity? You just installed PPM? Okay. Show me how it's helping me meet these objectives of these principles of governance. Show me how it's helping me make decisions that align with the business. Show me how it's helping me ensure that we're delivering value for our investments. Show me how it's helping to manage risk, resource, and performance. And I'll tell you, if you're using Clarity correctly and if you've got good PPM, you can prove each of these things. So we need the metrics and measures in place to show that we can do that. I've mentioned, very quickly, oh, yeah, by the way, you need this stuff. I mentioned it earlier. I've provided a PDF to your hosts, and you can get a copy of the full presentation. And in that, you'll find some more slides that have some analyst and pundit views of IT governance. You'll see detailed descriptions of the principles that I've talked about, some descriptions, some slides that talk about each of those 5 decision areas, a slide for each of the process details, a slide for each of the metric areas that are in that previous slide, and then some other things that are some nice tools that I've borrowed a lot of them from MIT Scissor. Peter and Gene are great, and they come out with new stuff every year. But some things that describe, how you can assess, whether or not you have good IT governance resiliency, what are the symptoms of poor governance, and then a couple of slides that have recommendations for maturing IT governance. Again, that's in the full presentation. So my advice, if you're going to do this stuff, everything that I described, you're doing it because there's a business problem that you're solving or a business opportunity that you're exploiting. You're not doing governance for the sake of governance, and this applies to process as well. If you're installing any governance or process, it's not because PPM is a good thing to do. It's because PPM will solve this business problem or that business problem or help us exploit this business opportunity or that business opportunity. Everything we do from a governance standpoint, from a process standpoint, from a technology standpoint, is because we can clearly articulate the business value that we're delivering, the business goal in mind. That's what's driving us. Transparency. When you do this, boy, you're going to have data. Governance, one of the best things about governance and process for that matter is the transparency. We can see what's going on. We're going to design deliberately. We're going to do things at an enterprise level of governance. We might do things at a business unit level. Be very, very aware of the decisions that you're trying to govern and where those decisions reside in the enterprise and design it appropriately. And no one-size-fits-all. Anybody that says, here's the book on governance, they're selling you a bill of goods, and you best better, if you adopt it, keep your fingers crossed that it just happens to be the right fit of thousands of different flavors out there for your organization. When you're putting in governance, it's a 365, 24/7 until the day you die proposition. You're constantly striking the balance between too much governance and too little governance. You're all in dynamic organizations. If you install this stuff, you're going to have to make sure that you're looking at it to make sure it's the right fit. The governance process that you install can be very, very sophisticated, or they can be very, very simple. We can put in policies and standards and processes, or we can put a poster on the wall that helps people make the right decisions. Find the right. And always err on the side of keeping it simple. And then ownership. Man, you need folks that will educate people as to what governance is about, that engages them. and incentivizes them to participate in these efforts because they know it's for their good. It's for the good of the enterprise. It's for the good of your customers. And then you're constantly, when you're putting this in, and a lot of this stuff starts with collective philosophical and intellectual agreement by leadership. We just know that it's the right thing to do. Don't rest on that. Don't expect that intellectual and philosophical agreement to always be there. You're constantly proving yourself. So the 3 M's. Metrics and measures, but then marketing. You're bludgeoning people with your accomplishments. You're bragging day and night about all the things that PPM or any other governance process you're putting in is doing to make the enterprise more successful. If this stuff works, it absolutely requires executive sponsorship. They need to be there to have the vision for any governance that we're putting in place, and then knocking down the constant obstacle. I guarantee the obstacles and barriers that you're going to encounter, they have to be there to help us push through. Business participation. IT can sponsor this stuff. They can start it. In most cases, they will. But, boy, we got to get the business in there. And I wish the business would lead it. At the very least, they need to be a partner. I mentioned the need for business process and how critical that is. And then last but not least, this is all about decision-making. I want to make the best decisions, and I want as many of those as possible to be based on fact. There will always be some that we make based on our fuzzy estimate, our best guess, maybe even what our gut tells us, but I want that to be the exception and not the norm. And for it to be the exception, I need to have a systematic way of collecting the data that's right, to analyze it, integrate it, and then most importantly, gets it to the people that are making those decisions. And boy, you want to talk about something that Clarity does? It fulfills that purpose beautifully. That's so critical so that we make the right decisions. And having that systematic approach makes it a lot easier. Here's a shameless plug for my book. It's called Eliminating Us and Them, where I talk about the 3 pillars that are required to do something about the divide that exists between IT and many of the businesses that they support, and that is good governance, good process, and process management, and a good culture that fosters the right values, that foster the right behaviors in the organization. You need to look at all 3 of those at the same time. If you're doing governance without looking at process and without looking at culture, I guarantee it's going to fail. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation.
Steve, thank you very much. That was, as I said to somebody during the presentation, unbridled enthusiasm regarding your topic, and thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
We're going to move on to questions for Steve, so we'll throw that out there. If you do have questions, please, you can do it via the website, or you can tag our moderator, I believe it's Tabitha, and she will help you get those questions to us. So that being said, Jeff, I'll turn it to you for questions.
Yeah, Steve, while we're waiting for any questions to come in, I have always believed that there's a distinction between project management and program management, what we call today the program management office. And about 12 years ago, it was popular to view the program management office as having 2 roles: defining measures and gathering and reporting those measures to management as a separate activity from management. How does that relate to what you've covered?
You know, it's interesting that you call it a separate activity. So that almost, when it's done separately like that, it almost seems like an audit function, as opposed to the metrics and measures that I want to see by the portfolio management office, the program management office, the product management office, are those measures that management, that leadership has decided in partnership. And again, a lot of that time they may not know what the right things to measure. So maybe your project and program and your portfolio managers are helping them figure out what the right measures are. But trying to say, okay, how do we determine whether or not the things that we're doing are successful? That those types of measures are really born of the enterprise having an understanding of what their goal is, and then having a good understanding and agreement on how to measure whether or not we're meeting those goals. So it's interesting that you call it separate from management, because again, that's what, when separate from management would be audit. When audit says, okay, we're going to look at what you're doing after the fact, or before the fact in many cases, and determine whether or not you're doing what you should be doing. And it's always interesting how there's some contention and maybe disagreement as to whether or not that's correct. But the metrics and measures that I want to see in any portfolio or program or project management office are the ones that are agreed upon, the ones that everyone's embracing, and that everyone understands. And metrics and measures are so important because We're not doing it to show that we're getting work done. We're not doing it to show how busy we are. We're doing it as a validation of the decisions that we're making and as a way of getting the information that's needed to make the next set of decisions. So if you've got a metric and measure in place and you can't show me who is clamoring for that information and why they need it, what decision that they're going to make as a result of that, then I would argue it's a complete waste of time. So separating it from management, it's a very interesting concept. In fact, it's a little difficult for me to understand. Is that it?
Steve, thank you for that response. We have one question about the handouts, and we were trying to put them, and we will put them on the GUC website, but thank you to Carol. I am now currently uploading them to the live meeting site, and you should be able to download them directly, hopefully, in just a moment. Steve Van Arsdale. Steve, you want to speak your question, or should I read it for you?
No, I'll be happy to ask. Excellent framework, Steve. This puts IT governance in a context. But I have a challenge for you. I wonder if you can summarize the business case for establishing formal IT governance in an organization.
Summarize it. The way I'm going to establish a business case is by showing what we're not doing well. I mean, I'm going to show the gap. So I'm going to show how we're throwing money away. I'm going to show how we're putting the organization, in an unnecessary, dangerous risk position. I'm going to show how we're not using the best use of our resources. I'm going to show how we're not performing at an optimal level. I'm going to show how we're doing things and it's not the right fit for the enterprise. And basically what I've done is looked at those principles. I mean, if you want to put in formal governance, let's say, okay, I just came in your organization. You say, Steve, we want to put in governance. We heard your presentation. We want to put it in. The next question is going to be why. Why do you want to put it in? Show me the business reasons for doing it. And so you have to be able to show me how this governance is going to help us save money. How this governance is going to make sure that is going to improve our ability to find the right technology for the organization. How this governance is going to help us, manage and mitigate risk. How this governance is going to make better use of that's what it basically is. You're going to show me in one of, or probably more of those areas, how we're going to do that. If you can't, then why bother? It means everything's working smoothly. It means we don't have any problems. Let's keep cruising the way that we're cruising, because everything that I described costs money, takes time. There's overhead always with governance and process. And I love that stuff, but as I mentioned before, we're not doing it for its own sake. You want to sell me IT governance, formal mechanisms? Show me how those mechanisms are going to make things better, and use those principles that I shared with you as guide sticks as to the things that we want to prove that we're making better. Oh, the last thing I'll answer is understand how your organization defines value. And that's first and foremost, because you have to be able to, everything that we install from a governance perspective, from a process perspective, we have to be able to show delivers value in those terms. So if I want to put in a PMO, I have to be able to describe that PMO in terms of value that my leadership embraces, that my leadership understands. That's a very important thing.
Very good, Steve. Steve Van Arsdale, do you have any other follow-up to that? We have a couple more questions.
Excellent answer. Thank you very much, Steve.
Operator, do we have any call-in questions?
There are no audio questions.
Okay. We have a question from Don. If you are in a multi-user organization, multi-tier organization, how do you recommend handling ITG across the whole organization in the face of siloing and control conflicts?
Right. So it's interesting, too, because when you say multi-tiered, I was looking at a federated governance model. I automatically went, oh, multi-tiered, that's no problem. What we're going to have is governance that's specific and particular to those tiers so that it makes sure that the tiers operate as they should. And then it's a matter then of installing the level of governance at the highest level of the enterprise to make sure that that governance, that tiered governance, that federated governance is achieving the goals of the enterprise. So without jumping right down, we use the word silo and it has an automatic negative connotation without coming to the knee-jerk response that, ooh, silos are bad. I'd have to look at the detrimental aspects of those silos. In many cases, I'm going to build silos in because they make good sense for my business model. That what my business units are providing, that they're so disparate, that they're so unique, that I want them to function independently, and I'm actually willing to pay for the overhead of multiple iterations of maybe technology deployments, maybe multiple architectures that serve those silos specifically. But when it gets to the point where that becomes a losing proposition, where now all of a sudden providing that type of service in a singular fashion or that type of capability in a singular fashion that's multiplied across the enterprise becomes too expensive, or we find that we don't have to have those individual and unique solutions. Now I'll start looking at providing things in a more centralized fashion. But again, I have to be able to show that it doesn't make economic sense to do it in the way that we're doing it. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm always going to be chartered with providing 100% capability to each of those silos, to each of those business units. I can look at that and I can do the math and say, you know what? If you compromise, if I only give you 90% of what you need and only 80% of what you need and only 70% of what you need, granted, you will miss that 10%, that 20%, that 30%, but we will cut our costs down by 50%. That becomes a decision that the board needs to make, a decision that the CEO and the CFO need to make. And that's the kind of math that you're going to do to determine whether or not we're going to inflict, again, things that are across the entire organization and put everybody through it, or whether we're going to say we're going to govern, in those tiers. You have to do that math. You have to look at it. You might think, I think a lot of people would listen to me speak and say, oh, Steve likes a centralized governance and a centralized control. I'm just as big a fan of a federated model as I am a centralized model, because that centralized model will always have a downside. So we're doing the math. What's the business value of doing things in a singular fashion where we're marginalizing to some degree what we're providing each of the individual business units, but when we look at the aggregate computation of that, it's good for the enterprise. That's a decision, that's the math that everybody needs to do. So again, I'm getting to that business value, that math, being able to show that we're solving a problem. There's something wrong with letting silos function disparately or autonomously or uniquely.
Very good, Steve. We have time for one more question. Operator, do we have any call-ins?
There are no audio questions.
Okay, we have a question from Christy Reynolds. When developing a metrics dashboard for a PPM executive team, what guidance can you give on how to determine the best, most useful metrics to use without overwhelming them with too much data?
Right, overwhelming them, and that's just it. If they contact me in my emails there, if she contacts me, I'd love to send her my metrics presentation. I'd love to share that with her. It'll give her a lot of guidance. But a very brief answer is find out what decisions that they're making. Find out what they're accountable for. What are they trying to achieve? And then just figure out what information they need to achieve that. And that's your first approach. Now, you're going to have to temper that, because then you're going to be assured that they're going to want it. Then you're going to be assured that they're going to need it, because they're going to say, this is the information that we need. Now, there's a couple dimensions now. When someone says, here's the information I need, I think it's a fair question. You'll have to be diplomatic about this, about saying, okay, why do you need that? What are you using it for? Because in many cases they're asking for data because they read somewhere this is data it's really good data. But if they're not making a decision in response to that, if they don't know exactly how they're going to use that information, they are wasting your time. The other dimension to this is they don't always know what they need. And so again, you have to handle this diplomatically, but with a PPM practitioner that really understands what PPM has to offer, there may be an education process where you go through and say, okay, you're accountable for meeting these objectives or these strategies or these goals of the enterprise, and you're using this information to do it, and you're making these decisions. Here, PPM can also give you this. PPM can also provide you this, that. The idea is we can make you even better at making your decisions, but you're going to have to make sure that they understand the usefulness of that information that you're introducing and the need to add that decision to the number of decisions that they're already accountable for. So it starts with sitting down with them, doing that decision mapping. And I actually have a couple slides in my presentation to talk about that. And it's not easy to do, but doing decision mapping and data analysis to determine whether or not you're providing that data for their decisions, and then figuring out how you can improve their decision making, and it may be, again, educating them as to the things that you might be able to provide through capabilities such as Clarity and PPM to make them even better at what they're doing.
Steve, I want to, on behalf of the board, I want to thank you so much for your excellent presentation. We've covered the allotted time. Karen, unless you have anything to add, I think we'll move on to the next portion of our presentation, which is Stephanie Dumbrell from CA, who's going to be talking to us today about the version 13 fix strategy. Stephanie, are you here?
I am here. Thank you very much. And I will say it's Steve's a hard act to follow. So next time, Steve, I get to go before you. So I'm going to talk about something that is probably in the grand scheme of things kind of boring, but I also know it is very, very important to our customers. So we've updated our fix strategy, so I'm going to take you through that. And we, of course, have the obligatory slides that say everything we say here may change, although we're in our best interest, we're going to do everything we can to make sure that we keep on track, et cetera, et cetera. So I won't bore you with that. You've seen it many times. But let's talk a little bit about fix strategy. So we did an assessment. I came into this role in April, and we sat down and said, you know, what are the pain points for our customers? What do we really need to do to help get defect fixes in our customers' hands more quickly and make sure they're better quality? Now, I know that many of you have already started moving to the 13 version, and hopefully you're also seeing, as we have been seeing, the improvement in quality in 13 overall. But we also know that you're going to hit defects. So how do we hurry up and get you what you need to be successful? So we revised our fix strategy, and it's in two parts. I'm going to speak first to how we're handling the 12 version, and I'm going to speak to you about some new changes we're making for the 13 version. So I'm not going to read this slide, but what we've done is our current version of 12 is 12.1.3. So that's our service pack level with patches, et cetera, applied to it. We just released one of our patches, but going forward, this will be the only patch branch that we will be actively fixing until end of service. And Mike Lester, who's our Senior Director in charge of product management, asked me to also remind you that we are getting ready to send out our end of service letters for 12.1. You'll start to see those posted on the community as well as posted on support.ca.com. But for the 12.1 series, we will continue to produce patches for very critical issues and must-fix escalations approximately every 30 to 60 days between now and the end of next year, or when end of service ends, which I think is September next year. The priority for what goes in these patches will be set by our product management team, and again, it's on criticality, so we're really looking at severity 1 issues or anything that is a severity 2 that is blocking functionality. So we really have to focus our energy on making sure we're fixing the right things to keep everybody moving forward until you can get your plans in place to move to 13. There will be no enhancements delivered, and I know that this has been an issue in the past, not necessarily in the 12 line, but before that. But these patches on 12.1.3 will contain no enhancements whatsoever. So from a perspective, just to recap, on the 12.1 line, 12.1.3 is our latest version there. That's where all of the fixes will be, and you will start to see us announce those fix packs coming out, or those patches coming out on the community. And I'd like to thank Marty. I know Marty has helped us with that in the past, getting the word out, but we also want to be proactive and make sure you know what's going on. So start to watch the communities, and you'll see us announce as well. Okay, so if you could please move to the next slide. Thank you. So let's talk about 13, because 13 is different. we're moving to a release cadence on 13, which I believe that you've already heard from Michael Lester if you've attended his presentations. But we will start to release smaller incremental versions for 13 once every 6 months. So we're moving to an April and an October patch cadence, or release cadence. This allows us to get out to our customers more targeted enhancements more quickly that aren't in such a big release. So 13 is a pretty big release. There's lots of good changes in there. But we also know that sometimes those bigger changes are hard for you to get in. So we've moved to a release schedule that allows us to compact that a little bit so you're not getting such a big release to put in, but allows us to get you things quickly. With that, we're also then moving to a monthly patch cadence on the 13 series. So we started this in April in the 1301 version, and we so far have had reports of good success with this, that we're getting timely fixes to all of you very quickly so you can move your business forward. As with our 12 patches, these will still be critical fixes and items that are impacting many customers because we want to make sure we're getting as much dealt with as possible. What you will not see in these patches are things that are very complex or risky. Those will be deferred, for example, to our April release. But we're getting processes in place to be able to tell you that more quickly. I know and acknowledge that we do have a gap there that if you report a defect to us, we don't always get back to you very quickly with where you'll see that addressed, or if you even will. There could be instances that we won't fix it, but you deserve to know that too. So you'll start to see improvements in that area. Again, we work very closely with our product management team on setting priority, and then we also, again, promise we're not going to put enhancements in these patches so you can take them very quickly. And these monthly patches are cumulative. They also contain about 15 to 25 defects per patch, and that also allows you to test more quickly so you can get these into production. And then we also have started to do something on our patches that we've never done before, and that's that we're now fully regression and performance testing them as well. And you'll see I have an example patch cadence here, and very soon we will start to share with you the actual patch cadence about, approximately what week in the month we're going to deliver these patches so you can plan. But what you will see here is about every third patch we have what we call an extended testing phase, and this is really where we run all of our full performance and full regression tests. So you make sure that you have that same quality level in your patches as you do in the releases. What you will also see on the little diagram here is, since we're moving to this new release schedule, as soon as we start to release the other versions, we will cease patching the older one. So in this case, you'll see 13.0, our last patch is scheduled in November, and then we will move to patching on our 13.1 series. What we're looking at here is making sure that, again, with these releases, we don't only put just enhancements, but we also add quite a few defect fixes as well. So the better quality is always with the most current release, so that's why we want to make sure that we're patching things correctly as well. One of the other things you will see on the 13.1 series, and we'll produce a schedule for everybody, as I said, but on our odd number releases, so the 13.1, 13.3, 13.5, or whatever we call them, for example, once the new version in April comes out, we will continue to patch that line until the next version comes out. So in this example, 13.1 just was released to EA up on support.ca.com. So you'll see that we're doing monthly patches for that until our April release. Well, we will then move to a bi-monthly or once every 3 months patch cadence on 13.1 until our next October release is out. So you'll still be able to get fixes you need that are critical, but then you'll also be given time to get your upgrade plans in place to be able to move to the October release, for example. The other thing that I'd like to note here is that we're moving to an agile development process, and I think that many of you already know what that is. And what that really allows us to do is work very closely with all of our resources and our development teams to make sure that we're getting quality fixes out and making sure we're fixing the right things. So this isn't about a volume game. It's not about let's pick all the easy bugs and go put them in a patch. It's let's really fix what you need to make sure you're successful, and that's our entire goal, and Agile is going to help us get there. So we will be starting that particular process in the next month, so you'll start to see the benefits of that as well. So that is the short story. What we will, again, start doing is posting up on the communities any patches we release, and then what you will also start to see is we'll start to share this patch cadence with you, again with the understanding that dates may change if we hit something that's critical or complex, but our goal is to deliver these patches on time so everybody gets good benefit from them. And then the other improvement that you're going to see, and it's going to take us some time, so I ask for your patience, but we're going to start being more precise with you about defects that are logged. When are we going to fix them? And again, are we going to fix them? That way that allows you to help plan, and it also makes sure that we're having a very open and honest conversation with you. So with that, I will be quiet and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. Operator, do we have any questions?
As a reminder, to ask an audio question, please press *1.
Also, you can use the live meeting Q&A tab if you wish to ask Stephanie a question.
There are no audio questions.
Well, Stephanie, I think you did a great job of communicating. And thank you very much for that information. And, of course, Stephanie, we have a question from Kristen. Kristen is asking, is the April-May release going to be 13.2?
That's a very good question. It has been referred to 13.2. I'm always hesitant to say an actual number because then if we change the numbering, it confuses people. But yes, it's been the same.
Okay. Any other questions from the membership? If not, I want to thank you very much, Stephanie, for taking time to join us today. What we're going to do.
And I told you it wasn't going to be nearly as exciting as Steve's, but hey, maybe next time. Thank you all.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. Our next speaker is Richard Shapiro, Vice President of the Global User Community, and, of course, an engagement manager with Digital Celerity. Richard?
Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm sure you can hear me okay. I've got a short presentation, everybody, but I think I've got the most pleasurable one because I get to announce that we're giving away money. And I think when I say that, I think I now have everybody's undivided attention. All the emails stop. As you may remember, most of you may remember, the Global User Community has a user incentive program which is designed to get people involved in the global user community on our message boards and with sharing solutions to problems that they've had with other members of the community. So we have several awards. We have one that is Most Valuable Answer or Solution. We have one that is Most Solutions Posted and one that is the Project of the Year. So, Jeff, if we can go to the next slide. Thank you. We are actively, I'll get into the actual awards in a moment, but understand that we are actively looking for people to give money to. We want to give this money away, get it out there, and recognize the people who have contributed most to our community. It's about recognition as well. We call it incentives, but it is about recognition. We need your involvement to nominate candidates for the awards. It's that simple. Anybody who's a member of the GUC is eligible for an award. Anybody who's a member of the GUC, the Global User Community, can nominate somebody. Unfortunately, you can't nominate the board members, so Karen, me, Jeff, Michael, and the other board members are shut out. But short of that, you can nominate anybody who's a member who you think is making an outstanding contribution to our community. This is about us. Jeff? Thank you. Our first award is Most Valuable Answer or Solution on the Global User Community Message Board. You'll find the message board in the CA communities on the ca.com website. Our criteria is very, very simple. What's the most useful and or innovative use of clarity as judged by the board members, right? And we'll take a majority vote and decide. So that what that says is that when you nominate somebody, say this solution, this use of Clarity was most useful, you want to give us a good description and a good, exciting reason to give the money and make the vote as easy as possible for us. We want to do this quarterly. We have not been able to do it as much as we want because we've been lacking in nominations, so we want to give it away. Give the money away. Each award in this category is $300 US, and our last recipient was David Morton, who got his award in the spring for his contributions to the message board. So we're very, very happy that David got it, and we'd like to give away more money. I will say that if we get particularly good nominations, we are considering actively with this and with the other awards to increase the level of recognition, to give away even more money if we think it's something special. If we can do it, no reflection on David, he got his $300 because that's what we had announced. But we're even actually considering raising this up, so we really need your nominations on most valuable answer or solution. Jeff? Thank you. Most solutions posted and accepted for the year. A lot of people here are consumers of the website. We go there, we look at the conversations, we look at the message boards and see what's being proposed as, put forward as problems and who's proposing solutions. And less of us, a minority of us, actually are proposing solutions. I do want to say in getting into this particular incentive and recognition award that it's really okay to propose solutions, that more people should be doing it. That we should all step up and share the knowledge that we work. We want to increase the base. We do have an award recipient for this quarter. I looked at the attendees list and I didn't see his name, but for most of you who are active, it should come as no surprise that the board is pleased to announce a $300 cash award to Marty Kunanen, also known as Marty K., who is extremely active not only on the CA.com community boards, but also on the LinkedIn Clarity PPM boards. Marty, I don't think he's on the call today, but we'll be in touch with him and make sure he gets that $300 to spend as he wishes. He's done a great job in proposing solutions all through the year. We want to do this again in January and look at it and get it on an annual cycle and go for it. We do not anticipate on this award that multiple. So if you've got the most one year, that may give you a leg up into the next year. So we're going to look at the next most and say, if you've received this award already, we want to incent and recognize other people. So we'll be rotating through. Don't be intimidated because Marty is still very active and he's great, and we encourage him to do so. So congratulations to Marty. Next slide, please. Our last award is the Clarity GUC Project of the Year. This one's a little bit complicated. I'm going to slow down just a bit if you'll allow me. We want one project nominee per regional community coordinated by the regional coordinator. And we're going to talk to the user groups as we go. I like myself to go to the Florida user community because that's where I live these days. And I'm going up next week to the New York City, to Tammy Reel is hosting the New York City Regional Community User Group, and I'm going to tout this up there and ask them for their nominations for Project of the Year. We need to close the nominations 3 months prior to the CA World Conference. And the reason we do this is because the awards are tied to CA World. We have to have time to make arrangements with the winners. The procedure is simple. The GUC, the Global User Community Regional Coordinator, collects and assembles nominations from the regional user groups. A selection committee of 3 of our board members will pick 3 final nominees, and those nominees will be presented to the full board for 2 weeks of review and a majority vote. So it's quite a thorough and a complete process to make sure we understand the project of the year, project that used Clarity in a particularly innovative and or effective way. Jeff, I think I have one more. Yeah. Nope, I don't. But if we can go back, my apologies. But we want to thank you all for your participation today. Remember, we are asking you to participate. We want your coming in with your suggestions, your comments, your nominations, your solutions. And we want to get this money out. There's no point in the Global User Community Board holding on to this cash and seeing it earn interest and become taxable. We want this money out there given to the to you guys for the work that you're doing every day to contribute to the community. That's it, unless there are any questions, Jeffrey.
Richard, I thought you might want to share with membership what the incentive award is for, is associated with the project of the year.
We are. Thank you, Jeff. That's what I thought was on the extra slide, so my apologies to everybody. That is a scholarship payment to attend CA World. So that's why we need to have this prior to the CA World Conference 3 months, so that we can work with people to make arrangements for them to attend and get their award in front of the entire GUC meeting at CA World. Are there any other questions, Jeffrey, that I can handle?
Operator, do we have any call-in questions?
There are no audio questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Richard. Karen has had to step away due to a fire alarm in our building, so we're going to move right on to the next portion of our presentation. Steve Van Arsdale, our treasurer, is going to give us a sandbox update.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's nice to speak to the community, and I appreciate this opportunity. And as Stephanie pointed out, it's a little hard to follow these acts. Evangelism, new version 13 protocols, and free money. But I can report that the Clarity Global User Community sandbox systems are alive and well. We continue to enjoy the use and the support of CA support engineering to have both a version 12 and a version 13 sandbox systems for members to use. And in this weekend, we will be refreshing the sandboxes and to allow the creation of logins for another batch of 100 Clarity User Community memberships. Beginning in September and for a limited time, probably 60 days, GUC members who successfully apply for a Clarity Global Sandbox login will also have a second login established on the version 13 system. Users may compare, develop, and use the studio on these systems within reason, and are simply asked to respect the environment, and of course other users. Every 60 days, the systems are being refreshed. Login applications for this next cycle are being accepted now. The first step, log into the Global User Community website and complete the short survey, which we use to develop metrics on how the system is being used. Send an email to me or to any Global User Community Board Director. Please include your name, your email address, and your company. If there are logins available, you'll be awarded a full administrator's login to both the 12 system and the version 13 system. Logins will be available and active for about 2 months. But logins are going fast. We are limited, and there are many applications in play already. So complete your survey as soon as possible. Along those lines, I'd like to ask a question here. If Jeffrey, you can assist by putting up our poll question. I would like each of you who are on the call to simply let me know if you had at your disposal a free version 13 Clarity PPM system for 2 months. What do you think you would do most with that system? Use it for development, finding new ways to use Clarity. Use it for testing things that you have developed. Use it for training yourself or others. Possibly use it to demonstrate a Clarity system to members of your organization or of your community. Or use it specifically to help reduce the support calls by analyzing developments in your production Clarity systems. If each of you would be kind enough to record your responses in this poll, it will help to develop the business case for continuing our Clarity sandboxes.
Steve, I think we can see the results if we have it configured right?
Yes, I think we can. All of you who are on this call, I appreciate your time. And I hope that you continue to enjoy the use of the Clarity sandbox systems along with us as much as you can. Jeffrey?
Steve, there's a question from Bob Copens, but you can take that offline. He submitted a request but hasn't gotten a response. You'll follow up with Bob, I'm sure. And, of course, any other members of the community that want to take advantage of this wonderful opportunity to test and develop is certainly welcome to send a request, as Steve has indicated. Do we have any other questions for Steve? Oh, Richard, do you want to make a statement?
Yeah, I just want to add to what Steve, to support Steve and support the sandbox. Yesterday I had occasion to give some help to a local Miami company who was trying to understand the values of 13, and they asked me to come over and just spend a few minutes, no charge, and talk to them and see how they understood 13. I was about 15 minutes into the conversation when I found out these guys knew a whole lot more about 13 than I thought they did, and I asked them where they got that knowledge. They had no idea that I was vice president of the GUC, by the way. They said, "Oh, we've got this access to a V13 sandbox we get through the user community." They had made a tremendous amount of progress in evaluating the shift from 12 to 13 and understanding what 13 is supposed to look like and how it's supposed to function in the right ways, just by having access to this. So we can't stress enough the value of the sandbox. And if you can help Steve by saying, is it development, is it test, is it training? In that case, it was demonstration yesterday. And fill out the survey. It will be helpful to the whole board. It was a great little incident just yesterday that shows the value. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Richard. All right. We have a question from Tom Haroldson. For how long a time will the sandbox be available? Right now, Steve, I don't know if we have any specific duration. CAA has been evaluating the use, and so far they seem to be in support. Does any member of the board have any additional information to share? Or if you're with us, Chris, maybe you want to chime in.
Well, this is Chris from CA. At this point, the funding continues, and I think with all the activity that you guys have generated on here, and I know, Steve, you pretty much filled up on logins every month, I haven't seen anyone saying that's going to change. So.
Good. Certainly we all feel, the board feels, I think, in general, that this is a valuable addition that the global user community has been able to work with CA to provide to our membership. And certainly we would appreciate any follow-up emails from the membership as to their experience. If this has been valuable to you, we need your feedback so that we can provide it to CA to ensure that they're willing to provide this capability on a continuing basis. Steve or Richard, anything to add?
No, beyond this, Jeff, this is Steve Anarzi. The use of the sandboxes and the extraordinary gift of these software and all the support from CA has truly added a tremendous amount of treasury to the Clarity Global User community. It's unprecedented in my experience. And as Richard was kind enough to point out in his example, there's almost no limit to the amount of value that can be garnered from an asset like this. And the most important thing is that we consider ways to use it effectively. And I think we've got a good start on that. I appreciate all the support and the interest. That's it for me, Jeff.
All right. Thank you. Unless any of the other members of the board have something to add, we always end our global user community webcast by asking you, CA has encouraged that we do so, but course, the board is interested as well to get your feedback. And, of course, we're sharing that with you. We certainly want your feedback. And now what I'd like to do, either through the Q&A tab or through contacting the webcast operator, we would very much like any comments you have on this webcast, or for that matter, suggestions or comments on the global user community's activities. The board is simply a member of this community. We are all here trying to add value and finding ways to work with the membership and CA to ensure that we have the best available capabilities. You know, this year adding the sandbox, I think, has been a great addition to the message boards and the quarterly webcasts. But certainly we might and can do more, we're looking for suggestions from the community. If you certainly want to make a suggestion now or in a follow-up email to any of the board members, we'd appreciate your input. Do any of the other board members have any comments? Well, if not, I'd like to thank everybody for attending. We had a good showing today of over 138 people, and we will be looking forward. We have presented, for those of you who are still here, up in the upper top bar, you'll see there's an icon called Handouts. And Steve Romero has added his handouts there, and you can download them. We will also have them on the user community website as soon as we resolve the technical issue that we have in uploading them. We should get that resolved shortly, and you'll be able to go there. We'll be providing a link to a recording of this webcast as well in a follow-up email, and we will have links to those documents included as well. Well, thank you all for your participation. Operator, did we have any other call-ins?
There are no